In the quiet town of Da Nang, Vietnam, a young man named Nam lived a life that was ordinary but full of untapped potential. Nam was 25, with a kind smile and a curious mind. He worked at his family's bicycle repair shop, a modest but steady business. Nam spent his days fixing flat tires, adjusting gears, and chatting with locals. Yet, while his hands were busy, his mind often wandered to faraway places. Nam had grown up watching travel documentaries on a small TV in the shop. He was captivated by scenes of bustling streets in Tokyo, the Eiffel Tower glowing at night, and surfers riding waves on Australian beaches. These images made his heart race. One day, I'll see these places, he thought. But there was one big obstacle. Nam couldn't speak English. He remembered his school days, sitting at the back of the classroom and struggling with English lessons. His teacher's voice seemed like a blur, and the words felt impossible to pronounce. His classmates often laughed when he mispronounced words, making him feel embarrassed and unmotivated. By the time he graduated, Nam could barely say hello or thank you. Years later, this lack of English haunted him. Tourists often came to his shop, and while he admired their adventurous spirit, he couldn't hold a conversation with them. One day, a foreign traveler handed him a broken bicycle chain. The man smiled and said, "Can you fix this?" Nam nodded but felt ashamed that he couldn't reply in English. That moment became a turning point. I want to travel, but how can I if I can't even talk to people? Nam wondered. Determined, he decided to face his fear and learn English, no matter how hard it seemed. Nam didn't have access to fancy language schools or tutors, but he had something just as valuable: determination. He borrowed an old English textbook from his cousin, who had used it in college, and started with the basics. Every night after work, Nam sat at his small wooden desk with a notebook and a pen. He practiced the alphabet, simple words, and common phrases like, "How are you?" and "Where's the market?" He spoke to himself in front of a cracked mirror, trying to mimic the sounds he heard on YouTube videos. At first, it was frustrating. His pronunciation was clumsy, and he often confused similar words. "Why is bear and beer so different?" he muttered one evening. But Nam didn't give up. He downloaded free language apps on his old smartphone, which became his new best friend. The apps had interactive lessons, quizzes, and pronunciation guides. One evening, Nam decided to test his skills. At the local market, he saw a group of tourists buying fruit. Summoning all his courage, he approached them and said, "Hello, my name is Nam. Welcome to Da Nang." The tourists smiled and replied, "Nice to meet you, Nam." Though Nam didn't understand everything they said after that, the interaction filled him with pride. For the first time, he had used English in the real world. Over the next year, Nam practiced relentlessly. He wrote new vocabulary words on sticky notes and placed them around his room: door, window, light. He listened to English podcasts while repairing bicycles, even though he could only understand a few words. Little by little, he improved. Nam knew that the best way to truly learn English was to immerse himself in it. He decided to save money for a trip abroad. It was a bold and risky plan, especially for someone who had never left his hometown, but Nam believed it was the only way to achieve his dream. To save money, Nam worked longer hours at the shop. He repaired old bicycles and sold them for extra income. He avoided unnecessary expenses, skipping his favorite iced coffee at the market and saying no to social outings with friends. After nearly 2 years of hard work, Nam had enough money to fund a 1-month trip to Australia. He chose Australia because he had heard it was friendly to tourists, had beautiful landscapes, and was a great place to practice English. The night before his flight, Nam packed his small suitcase with essentials: clothes, a notebook filled with English phrases, and a Vietnamese to English dictionary. As he lay in bed, he felt a mixture of excitement and anxiety. What if I get lost? What if no one understands me? He thought. But he reminded himself of how far he had come. I've worked so hard for this. I can do it, he whispered. When Nam landed in Sydney, the sheer size of the airport overwhelmed him. Signs were written in English and announcements echoed in a language he still struggled to understand. Nam clutched his notebook, his palms sweating. At the immigration desk, the officer asked, "What's the purpose of your visit?" Nam hesitated but managed to say, "Tourist. I visit Australia." The officer smiled and stamped his passport. Nam breathed a sigh of relief. It was his first successful English conversation in Australia. His next challenge came at the taxi stand. "Excuse me, taxi to hotel," he said to a driver, showing him the address written on a piece of paper. The driver nodded and said, "Sure thing, mate." As the taxi drove through the city, Nam gazed out the window at the tall buildings, parks, and bustling streets. He felt both amazed and nervous. This is so different from home, he thought. At the hotel, the receptionist greeted him warmly. "Welcome. Do you have a reservation?" Nam didn't understand the word reservation, but he handed her his booking confirmation. "Ah, here it is. Room 306. Enjoy your stay," she said. That night, Nam lay in his small hotel room, exhausted but proud of himself for navigating his first day in a foreign country. Over the next few weeks, Nam explored Sydney's famous landmarks. He visited the Sydney Opera House, Bondi Beach, and the Royal Botanic Garden. At each place, he forced himself to interact with locals. At a cafe, he tried to order breakfast. "I want this," he said, pointing at a picture on the menu. The waitress asked, "How would you like your eggs? Scrambled, fried, or poached?" Nam froze. He didn't know what any of those words meant. Embarrassed, he said, "Any is okay." The waitress smiled and brought him scrambled eggs. Nam wrote the word "scrambled" in his notebook, determined to remember it for next time. Nam also joined a walking tour of the city. The guide, Emily, spoke clearly and encouraged questions. Nam listened intently, learning new words like harbor and bridge. He even asked, "Why is this bridge famous?" Emily explained the history of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and Nam felt proud for understanding most of her answer. One evening, Nam attended a barbecue hosted by the hostel where he was staying. There, he met other travelers from Japan, Germany, and Brazil. Though everyone had different native languages, they all communicated in English. Nam bonded with a Japanese traveler named Hiro. They shared stories about their countries and taught each other words in their native languages. Hiro said, "Your English is getting better every day." Nam smiled and replied, "I practice every day." These friendships became a turning point for Nam. Speaking English no longer felt like a chore. It became a way to connect with others. Not every moment was easy. Once, Nam got lost on a bus ride to the Blue Mountains. He asked the driver, "Where this bus go?" The driver spoke quickly, and Nam couldn't understand. Frustrated, he nearly gave up. But then he remembered a phrase from his notebook. "Can you say that slowly?" He tried again, and this time, the driver explained clearly. Nam found his way and learned an important lesson. Mistakes are part of the journey. By the end of his trip, Nam had transformed. His English was far from perfect, but he could hold basic conversations and navigate unfamiliar situations. Most importantly, he had gained confidence. When Nam returned to Vietnam, he shared his stories with friends and family. His journey inspired others in his town to learn English and dream bigger. Nam also continued to practice, knowing that his adventure was just the beginning. Nam's story is a testament to the power of persistence and courage. Through travel, he not only learned English but also discovered a world of possibilities. His journey reminds us that with determination, even the most daunting challenges can be overcome.